Welcome back to What the Hype. And Laura, I'm curious, where did our intro music go?
I think this is something we have in common with White Lotus, because I've noticed a lot of White Lotus fans wondering where the intro music to this show went, because it seems to be different.
Just a little different. And though there are little hints throughout the episodes where that iconic White Lotus theme song does play. But if listeners haven't guessed, we are spending some time this week diving deep into the HBO hit series, The White Lotus. But before we get started, we want to make sure that you're all following us on social media and your favorite podcast app. Just search for What the Hype Podcast. And don't forget, you can see full video episodes over on YouTube and Twitch, right?
That's right. Yeah, we live stream all of our episodes on Twitch, and then we put out our full edited versions on YouTube after the fact.
So one of the things that we do really like to do on this show is to get our fan status, right? We want to know, where do each of the hosts stand? Because sometimes when we come into these episodes, some are newbies, some have been longstanding fans of different TV shows, movies, fandoms, books. So I wanted to start out by asking Laura, what's our White Lotus fan status? How familiar are we with the show prior to sitting down and recording? Have we watched season 1, season 2? Because I know we're going to be talking a lot about season 3 over the next hour or so.
Yeah, Micah, I feel like this might be one of the times where both hosts are on the same page entirely, because I'm completely up to speed on the series, watched the first couple of seasons. I'm up to speed on season 3. What's not to love? It's a show about terrible people doing terrible things.
Though?
Well, a lot of them are. And there are some innocent victims that end up having to bear the brunt of the consequences. But yes, many of them are terrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, much like you, I've seen both seasons 1 and 2, very much enjoying season 3 thus far. And one of the other things we really like to do on What the Hype is give a little bit of background for those who might not be familiar with a show like The White Lotus. What is it about? The White Lotus is an American black comedy drama television series that was created by Mike White for HBO, premiered back in 2021. And the series follows the exploits of guests and staff during a week spent at a luxury global resort hotel chain called The White Lotus.
Yeah. And the first season was filmed and set in Hawaii, at the Hawaii White Lotus location, the second in Sicily at that White Lotus location, and the third current season is set in Thailand.
So do we have at least a favorite locale thus far, even though we're only 3 episodes into season 3 in Thailand?
I think I actually thus far have enjoyed season 2 the most.
Me too.
I just felt like there was a really good blend of characters and really compelling storylines happening, as well as the locale being like stunning. I think that's a really good chunk of the appeal here, is that you're getting to watch these like really juicy stories play out in these idyllic environments where any of us would want to spend a vacation. But I was just really taken by the storylines in season 2. I think I cared more about the season 2 characters than season 1's characters. So that was it for me.
The question would be, would part of that be because one of the characters from season 1 was also in season 2?
Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, she's a fan favorite too, right?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. What about you?
I actually really did like season 2 as well. And again, I'm wondering if that's because we had the buildup of Tanya McQuad's character in season 1, and then we get her again in season 2. But I also really like Michael Imperioli as an actor, and I love seeing kind of the family dynamic he had with his father and his son, and they're kind of exploring their roots, but they're all kind of the same person at the end of the day, just different ages, given some of the antics that they all get up to. But yeah, I would highly recommend. I don't necessarily think that you have to. This is not one of those shows that you absolutely have to watch in sequential order. The Tanya McQuad storyline, which is starting to rear its head here now in season 3, I think is probably the only main theme that runs throughout thus far. But aside from that, all the other storylines kind of start and end, at least as far as we know right now, in each of the first couple of seasons.
It does seem like if they wanted to establish a greater through line in these seasons, they could. But I agree with you, Micah. Right now, that's really the only like tangible through line in all of them. I do remember when I was watching the first season, I kept waiting for there to be some kind of darker secret about the White Lotus itself as an institution, especially given that it has multiple locations around the globe. I kind of kept waiting for that to be something that came up. But it really seems like a lot of the intrigue and the scandal thus far is more about the people, less about the hotel itself.
That's fair, but there is also some really great storylines and dynamics amongst the hotel staff.
Totally.
But I hear what you're saying. You're almost wondering, is the White Lotus some kind of underground market for some nefarious trade? Or I'm making it up, but is that kind of where your head was at?
Totally. I think especially in season 1, with all of the emphasis placed on, I think his name was Kai, one of the employees at the White Lotus, who made a point of talking about how the land the White Lotus was built on was stolen from local people who had been displaced because of it. So I just didn't know if that was just a commentary about these, world-class luxury hotels oftentimes coming at the expense of local communities, or if there was an added layer of corruption that was going to feed into the overall story.
Yeah, I think it's probably the former, right? It's a commentary, and Mike White, who's the creator, weaves a lot of that into the different stories and characters that we meet throughout the course of these seasons at the White Lotus. And he was actually inspired by his own experiences staying at luxury resorts, and the show's setting is heavily influenced by his time spent at upscale hotels, with particular attention to the dynamics that happen between the guests and staff. And I can only imagine, if you're just somebody who's a people watcher in these situations, some of the things that you must observe.
Yeah. Well, and I think something about it just really resonates for most anyone who watches it. And I think, the fact HBO greenlit the second season before the first season was even out, right? They were that confident in the material that they did that. And I think that's the reason that we're here right now talking about it. Yeah, there is something that I think there is something for everyone in this show.
Oh, for sure. And that works on so many levels. And I think we'd be remiss to not mention the symbolism of the lotus. So the lotus flower represents enlightenment, purity, and rebirth in many cultures. And so in this show, the flower might represent the characters' inner conflicts and the complex, often dark transformations that they undergo. There's plenty of that.
Yeah, for sure. I remember having this distinct feeling when I finished the first season of feeling like, and of course this is spoiler territory, But of course, season 1 came out like what, 4 years ago
Yeah,
at this point.
2021.
Yeah. So I mean, if you don't want to be spoiled on White Lotus season 1, this is your warning to stop now. But essentially, I walked away feeling like, okay, the only real way for people to escape this cultural environment is to die like Armand does, or to walk away from everything and everyone you've ever known, like the little brother from the rich family. I forget what his name is, but from the rich family does. And I think the show often comes with that type of social commentary about, I think the forces of like capitalism and tourism and the effects that it's having on those communities, and like what we as tourists bring to these types of environments, and then maybe the less than desirable effects that we leave behind when we leave them. So there's always really, really good commentary about that for sure.
Yeah, and I wonder if we're getting a little bit of that same vibe with Jaclyn in this particular season.
Oh, yeah.
He seems like he's very much the one that's trying to escape the intensity, and it comes up in this particular episode when he's going for the posture correction, right? So much is talked about how guarded he is and how he's got a lot of big personalities in his family. And so I'm wondering if he's going in that kind of similar direction. We see him on the beach actually at the very open of episode 3. We'll talk a little bit about that, but I think there's some symbolism there in the fact that he's the one talking to his mother on the beach. And I think he's surrounded on either side by what appear to be 2 Buddhist monks. I'd have to watch that again, just to be 100% certain. But again, I think there's something to that.
Yeah, I think so too. This show is just loaded with imagery like that. You could honestly go back and do an entire like Easter eggs and things you might have missed episode on a single episode of White Lotus alone.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of monkeys in this season.
And I'm sure we're going to talk about the significance of that in a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, we mentioned Jennifer Coolidge a little bit earlier, and before we kind of wrap up the first part of this discussion talking about the background of White Lotus, we can't do an episode on the White Lotus without mentioning her and her character, Tanya McQuad.
Yeah.
So without question, a fan favorite. She's won multiple awards for her portrayal of this character, including an Emmy, a Golden Globe, and a SAG Award. And for folks who may not know, she's this complex, eccentric character who is both deeply tragic and hilariously offbeat. Would you say that's a fair way to describe her?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, when you first encounter her, she comes across kind of dotty and self-centered. And I think those are still accurate descriptors for her. But the reality is she kind of fronts those personality traits to cover up a lot of pain and insecurity and grief. And I also think not knowing who she is as a person and trying to figure out the answer to that question.
Yeah, in the first season, is it the first season that she's dealing with the loss of her mother? Right.
Yeah, and that's correct.
There's clearly a lot of unresolved issues there. And then we get to season 2 when she has married Greg, and we'll get into kind of their relationship dynamic, I'm sure, a little bit. But it's clear that even she thought that by going off with Greg at the end of season 1 that she was going to be happy, but it seems to be anything but that when we meet her again in season 2.
Yeah, she's trying to run away from all her problems, and she's very, I guess, I don't want to say flippant about it, but she just makes a lot of rash decisions, even offering to fund Belinda's massage practice in the first season when she really hadn't displayed any kind of understanding of like what it would actually mean to support a small business owner in this way, and like how maybe for her that kind of thing felt like a drop in the bucket, but to Belinda it would have been life-changing. So
Right.
having it ripped away from her was horrible. So yeah, she just, I think that she makes a lot of rash decisions that are kind of rooted in that insecurity that we were
And she
talking
gets
about.
attached to people. Very
Yeah.
much happens with Belinda in season 1, where they're even going out and having meals together, which you would necessarily think would happen between a guest and a member of the hotel staff, even after only having been there for such a short period of time. So I think when she gets that initial treatment from Belinda, she's very much attached to her, and she sees somebody who's actually caring for her, maybe in the way her mother didn't. So, or maybe she is almost becoming, in a way, a surrogate to Tanya's mother. So we could go back and talk about seasons 1 and 2. That might actually be fun.
Yeah, for sure.
And one other thing that I found that was actually kind of fun was that Tanya's outrageous dialogue is largely attributed to Jennifer Coolidge's improvisational talents. And
she's so good.
This was something that I read not only about her character, but that Mike White encourages amongst his cast. So like some of the more intense moments that we see throughout the course of White Lotus are actually improvised by the actors.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And I think I actually saw an interview with the actor who plays Chelsea. Saw an interview with her specifically about like intimacy scenes, and, you know, her talking about how he was very much always been of the opinion to tell the actors, like, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do or anything that doesn't make you uncomfortable. Just do what feels right to you. So that definitely tracks.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think that's a good enough setting of the table for the White Lotus before we jump into the first couple of episodes of season 3. But before we do that, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after these messages from our very important sponsors.
How are we going to fund our White Lotus vacation without them?
I know we were relying on Tanya, but you know how that goes.
Yeah. Oops.
We might have to marry Greg.
Be careful. I don't know how that's going to work out for you.
Or Gary.
I'm worried about Chloe.
I know. Although I'm kind of worried about Belinda right now, to be honest with you.
Oh, yes, for sure. So the thing is, Belinda at least knows that she's in danger. Chloe has no idea.
Yeah.
So, anyway, maybe we should get into the spoiler warning.
Yes. Well, you issued one earlier, but just to be safe, as mentioned, we're going to be diving into the first 3 episodes of season 3 of The White Lotus. So if you haven't watched them, hit pause on the pod, fire up your HBO Max, and we'll see you in about 3 hours or so. Then it's safe to come back and give us a listen. So I wanted to just start off by asking, what do we enjoy about season 3 thus far that maybe season 1 or season 2 didn't give us?
Well, I'm loving the kind of attempt at forced disconnection that we're getting in this season. Obviously, it's only with the most recent episode that we've gotten.
Pam.
Do what?
Poor Pam. I mean, she's just trying her hardest to get those phones.
She really is. And it's not until this episode that she finally does. But I love the use of that mechanic as a way to keep people blocked off from the outside world so that they can't be constantly communicating with people who aren't at the resort. So I like that as a mechanic. I like the location. I like the overall themes around like Buddhism and karma. I think it's funny because oftentimes in this show, I think we get to see examples of how tourists will go places like this and kind of romanticize what they believe to be what makes that place beautiful or what makes that culture unique. And in doing so, they actually completely disrespect it in many ways. So I think that'll be an interesting theme to watch throughout the season. But I'm also really taken with this cast of characters. I mean, the cast of White Lotus is always stacked. But I'm really intrigued by some of the character motivations that are going on now, even though we may not entirely know what is driving them at this point. It's clear there are some like mixed threads that kind of cross each other. So I can't wait to see how that plays out. What about you?
It definitely seems like we're going to get some cross-pollination going on as the episodes progress. And I really do like what you said, though, about having to kind of disconnect from technology. And we see initially when that proposal is put in front of the Ratliff family, they're very much, for the most part, against it. Piper might have been the only exception there. But when the tables start to turn a little bit and the dynamic starts to shift, and Tim realizes, well, actually, this is a great way for none of my family to find out exactly what's going on back home. And so taking the cell phones and the tablets and the laptops and throwing them into this bag for the entire week is a really good thing. Now, whether or not he's going to go and try and get his phone back at some point, I think is probably a very high possibility.
Yeah.
Actually, at the end of this episode, that's what I thought he had like a burner phone that he was looking for, and he ends up looking for his wife's medication. But I thought it was going to be like he was going to pull out a secret phone, a second phone maybe that he had hidden in the bathroom.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if we did see that. But I think you're right, Micah. I think he's going to go try and like sneak it back out, because did you notice when he handed it over, he was literally having a physical reaction to no longer having his phone. He was like scratching his neck and like his arms and stuff. So it was like very clearly a withdrawal.
Separation anxiety.
Yeah, it's like a withdrawal symptom from his phone. Of course, clearly he's been doing some kind of money laundering. So his ass is definitely in trouble. But at this point, there's not much else he can do. His lawyer even told him, don't talk to anybody. The best thing you can do right now is just shut up. Yeah. So he's doing the right thing, according to his lawyer anyway.
Totally. The other things for me that stand out, I would say consistent with what you mentioned. I love the location. I love the tie to Buddhism, the tie to karma in particular, I think, especially for some of these characters. Some we may know now for a couple of seasons, and some that we're just being introduced to now. I think what goes around comes around, and we hopefully will get a payoff at the end of this season for one man whose name starts with a G. That's my hope anyway. But
yeah, same.
Much like the first two seasons of The White Lotus, season 3 opens with a bang. Literally a bang. A couple bangs. Some erratic bangs, actually. So I thought we could take a shot, pun intended, at trying to figure out, number one, who is the shooter? And number two, who is it that is floating by Belinda's son in that opening scene?
So can we talk about the fan theory for the shooter? Because I think I'm sold on it.
You like it?
I do like it. But can you introduce it for anyone who may not be familiar?
Yeah. So I guess to set the scene a little bit is Belinda's son, Zion, has come to visit her at the White Lotus, and he's actually going through one of the treatment sessions, and all of a sudden gunfire starts ringing out at the hotel, and he's very much concerned for his mother, which is only natural. That's where your head would go. And he then is trying to make his way to her through this lotus pond that is on the grounds there. But the gunshots that are being fired, they don't seem very targeted. They actually seem very erratic.
Yeah.
And so there's a very popular fan theory out there, which I think is a great one, is that one of the monkeys, or maybe more than one of the monkeys, actually got a hold of one of the guns and started firing it. And that's what's going on here.
I feel like this is pretty on brand because,
you do?
Yeah, I mean, if we think about the deaths in the last 2 seasons, I mean, deaths are tragic, of course, but like they were kind of goofy. I mean, in season 1, Armand gets stabbed after he took a shit in that guy's suitcase. And I forget the name of the character, but he was in his room armed with a knife because he knew there was an intruder, came around the corner, and I mean, it was kind of an accident that he stabbed him. And then in season 2, Jennifer Coolidge is like, she's scot-free. She killed all of them. She is clear to get out of there. And then she just falls off the boat and drowns. Like, right. It just kind of feels like it would be on theme for this show to pick something a little bit silly and anticlimactic to bring sort of like the death side of the story full circle while keeping you kind of focused on the whodunit the entire time, only to have the reveal be like, it was just a freak accident, you know?
And I think it speaks to what you were saying earlier about not respecting the environment that you're in and maybe not appreciating what's around you. We've gotten a lot of commentary on the monkeys so far, and you know, they're showing up quite a bit throughout the course of at least these first couple of episodes. There's a lot of artwork depicting them in the opening credits. And so it's clear that they are going to play into this season in some way. And what better way than, you know, you leave something lying around and who knows what can happen. Or perhaps I thought I saw something about even when the robbery happened, do we know what the robber did with the gun? Did he just throw it off into the forest there and not think anything of it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's entirely a possibility for sure.
The other thing that came to mind for me, and this kind of keeps with the monkey theme, is what if it's maybe not one of the monkeys who's doing the shooting, but perhaps people are shooting at the monkeys.
Oh, maybe like they got into something.
Or maybe they attacked somebody, and because they're so difficult probably to track down, right? Presuming they move a lot quicker than humans do.
Oh, yeah.
That could also be why the shots are so erratic.
Yeah, no, that definitely could be. And honestly, even a small monkey, like, they can do a lot of damage.
I'm sold on the monkeys being involved somehow. I love it.
I like it. Let's keep track of it and see as we get close to the end of the season if that's how it turns out.
Now, in terms of who the body is that we see start to float past Zion, there's a really great TikTok video out there that analyzes the opening credit art, and it may shed a little bit of light on who's quote unquote biting the dust. But I'm not 100% convinced on this one because the person who's shown kind of floating in the water is Jaclyn, the younger of the Ratliff siblings. What do you think about this?
I feel like it could be a misdirect, and maybe something else will happen to justify that artwork during the opening credits.
He's also floating face up, and I think the person who was floating past Zion was actually face down.
Yes. And the other thing is, I'm pretty sure that person, they definitely had brown hair, but of course, the way it was shot, the frame was kind of fuzzy, so it was intended to make it hard to identify the person. But when you think about people who have brown hair, I mean, that includes a number of people in this cast. I mean, what I think is
it's not Gary, because Gary doesn't have any hair.
No, we know it's not him. As we know, Chloe likes to point out during the show, all bald white guys look alike. So I guess even if somebody who matched that description were floating face down, we wouldn't know if it was him. But yeah, I mean, it could be, honestly, Jaclyn. It could be Piper. I've definitely seen some theories about that. I've seen theories about Chloe too. Just because, when people have thought about, some of the fan favorites, as well as people who have ended up biting the dust, there's tended to be crossover there. Like, people really like Armand. People really liked Tanya. So there's some school of thought that maybe if there's a character that people particularly like, and it seems like right now Chelsea might be that character.
Yeah, she's a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, she really is. But
she's
it seems like
actress.
They might also be setting her up to bite the big one. So,
well, we'll talk a little bit about her, but she's now been in situations in the first 2 or 3 episodes, right? Like the robbery, where she jokes about it with Chloe and with Rick, that she almost died, and they both say back to her, "No, you didn't." But in this episode, she gets bitten by a snake and taken to the hospital.
And it's Rick's fault.
And she makes a comment to him later on in the episode saying, like, if I ever die, you're never going to get rid of me. I'm going to haunt you, or something to that effect, right? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I didn't write down exactly what she said, but you might be onto something there.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
For Jaclyn, I see him as kind of finding himself in this season. So I would be very surprised if it was him. I also think like the idea of offing an 18-year-old is, it's not out of the realm of possibility for Mike White, but it just seems a little.
No, I think that he's probably the least likely. Anyone else you think of that comes to mind for you?
I've thought about Rick, but he's got darker hair, right?
Yeah, he does.
He's got some demons he needs to wrestle with in his past, though.
That's true. Well, maybe he does, and maybe he ends up face down in the water because of it.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the guests of season 3. We spent a little bit of time already on the Ratliff family, but this is a highly dysfunctional family of 5 led by Jason Isaacs, who plays Timothy. And if Lucius Malfoy was a Southern money launderer, it fits, right? Like,
yeah. And also, big shout out to Jason Isaacs for his Southern accent. I'm pretty impressed by it. There have definitely been a few times where he's kind of slipped out of it a little bit, but I'll let those go because I feel like overall he's really captured the essence of that, like, upper class Southern, like, country club type persona, and he is nailing it. I'm so impressed with him as an actor.
Yeah, he does a really great job in this role. And he, as you may have guessed from our conversation about cell phones and technology, is a workaholic father, married to Victoria, played by Parker Posey, who also does a fantastic job in this show. But she is very much dependent upon her pills. I think she's medicated 99.9% of the time.
Yeah, and she's always trying to offer them to her husband. She takes a lot of lorazepam, and she's always trying to get him to take some.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't take drugs, until the end of the episode where he does, but then he still pretends he doesn't.
Well, and this is actually very reminiscent of season 1, right?
Yep.
when the
Yeah.
drugs get found on the beach and they start to be abused by the hotel manager.
Yep.
So hopefully good old Timothy is not going down the same road.
Well, Timothy has a lot of problems right now. So
Yes, he does.
yeah. And also we have to remember he is in a part of the world where if he wanted to get his hands on even more extreme stuff than what his wife has, he can do it. So, and he's in a desperate
There's some
posture right now. So
pretty good weed in town, I hear.
Yeah. No, seeing Rick go and just buy a pre-roll, I was like, is that is that a thing?
Clearly.
I guess it is.
And he knew exactly where he's like, I'm going to go into town. I wonder if he researched before he went.
It looked like they were barely outside of the resort. Like, it was crazy.
Yeah. Well, in addition to Tim and Victoria, we have the three children who we've mentioned briefly, Saxon, Piper, and Jaclyn. And what's interesting about them is that they all have varying degrees of sexual tension, and it's mostly exhibited toward each other.
It's weird. I don't like it.
No, I don't know where we're going with this. So Saxon is the classic horn dog, and he is looking to hump anything that moves. It seems like he's made a little bit of a connection with Chloe, so I'm curious where that's going. And
yeah,
he's made some really questionable comments about his quote unquote hot sister, Piper, and Piper is very uncomfortable by all of this.
Understandably so.
And I think you mentioned this earlier. Piper is the reason that the family is here. She's doing her thesis on Buddhism. And I think there's a little bit of resentment, perhaps, on the part of Saxon that Piper has gotten what she wants. And the family has taken this trip to the other side of the world. And Saxon just seems like somebody that's very hard to please.
Yeah, no, he's definitely someone who is very self-centered, but I think he also has daddy issues. Like we saw in this episode, he cares a lot about his dad's business and being plugged in to what's going on there, because he's getting frustrated that the office is trying to reach them, and Timothy is like blocking that because he doesn't want the family to find out what's going on.
Right.
And this kid, I mean, Saxon basically just says to his dad, like, I'm paraphrasing here, but it was essentially something like, I really care about this and I like working with you. So it seems like this is someone who is constantly vying for his father's approval. And maybe he's frustrated in feeling like, my entire family took this trip to the other side of the world because my sister is doing this thesis. But again, I have questions about her thesis because it doesn't seem like she did a lot of prep before they got there to set
Friday
everything
at
up.
2:00.
Yeah.
I hope her person shows up.
That's the thing. So I can definitely see there being some tension around this. Like, it seems odd to me that the family planned this entire trip based on her thesis without understanding what she had done to like lay the groundwork for it when she got there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think Tim even brings this up during one of their meals. He said, we flew all the way here and you haven't even set up an appointment, or, you know, again, paraphrasing, but I do remember that conversation happening, and he's not wrong. I mean, you think that's probably the bare minimum that should have been done.
No, yeah. And I just think it's clear that they're kind of checked out on what their kids are doing.
Yeah.
Like they're not paying very much attention.
Were we meant to learn though that in this episode, it's more than a thesis. She wants to basically study here.
Yeah. And I think that's what she's been hiding from her family is like, it's not really a thesis. She's wanting to interview for a position at this school.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure exactly what it's for, but yeah, she wants to move here. Right. And, you know, maybe then it's her who escapes the family dynamic.
Perhaps.
You know, a couple of options for that.
But also, like, the person she was initially asking about wasn't there, and then the person she's supposed to have the appointment with wasn't available. I don't know. There's some things doesn't sit right with me about this, but I'm sure we'll learn more as we move
Something's
ahead
weird
in the season. And then the third sibling is Jaclyn, and he's just a huge question mark to me. At times, he seems like he's taken with his brother. At other times, he seems like he's taken with his sister.
Yeah,
he's just finding himself.
There's
right?
also just really weird sexual tension between these three, like you mentioned before. Like, Saxton is over here calling Piper hot, and Jaclyn is feeling comfortable enough to bring this up to Piper and also ask her if she's ever had sex before. These are really weird conversations to be happening between siblings. So something's weird here. And like, this wouldn't be a dynamic that just sprang out of nothing with the three of them. Like, there would have been some kind of inciting influence, I think,
right,
to bring that on.
Well, it also makes you wonder, how long has this dynamic existed? We're just seeing it play out on vacation, but, you know, and let's not forget, as we were talking about earlier, there are certain, I won't say real world applications, but maybe certain stereotypes in this case that are trying to be played upon here, right? Good Southern family.
Yeah.
Won't go any farther than that, but, you know, look, this is the White Lotus. We've seen some crazy shit over the first two seasons go down. Are we looking at a sibling throuple, threesome?
I really hope not. I don't think I could take it. It's too much. It's too much.
This is like Game of Thrones goes to Thailand, basically.
Yeah. In the 21st century. I hope not, but I can't rule it out, because this show has already shown us more than once that they'll push the envelope. So it could go there.
Well, I did want to mention one more thing about the Ratliff family, and I think it's an important dream that Victoria has at the start of this third episode, because she is dreaming of a tsunami that is going to hit not the hotel, but her family home back in North Carolina. And Jaclyn, as we said earlier, is sitting on the beach. She's got two people on either side of him. Again, I wasn't clear on exactly who those people were, but he seemed very calm, very at peace. So did she, but it looked like what was happening was that this storm is about to hit the Ratliff family. And this is not the first time tsunamis get brought up. There's actually a story that's being told by Jaclyn at the very end of the second episode that Tim overhears. And then you have the tsunami that gets shown on the tablet by Jaclyn to the family. So basically this family is about to get stormed. I don't know what the right term is.
No, I mean, I think all of it is very clearly a metaphor of their sort of family culture being on shaky ground. Because it's not just about what Timothy's done, but it's also about Victoria's drug problem. It's also about the kids and whatever weird psychosexual dynamic they have going on between them. It's the fact that the kids, I think, each are kind of lost in their own way and trying to figure out who they are. There's a lot. There's something rotten in Denmark, I think we could say about this family.
Well, we're going to talk about the rest of the guests at the White Lotus in Thailand. But first, we need to take a quick break, make sure there's no tsunami headed for either New York or Atlanta.
Hope not.
We will be right back after this. So, Laura, let's talk a little bit about the mean girl friend trio that has made their way to Thailand. Jaclyn, Kate, and Laurie, a girls' trip between friends who have not seen each other in years.
Yeah, these are just frenemies. That's all it is. It's frenemies coming together because they don't have any other friends who want to be around them. And it's basically a big comparison trip where they're all just going on this to try and feel better about themselves in comparison to the other two. It's very clear these three do not like each other, but they're like constantly triangulating where two of them will talk about the other one and so on and so forth. I think at this point, each pair has had a conversation about one outsider. And the most recent one we got was learning that one of them is a Trump supporter and the other two being horrified by that.
Yeah, we finally got a conversation between Jaclyn and Laurie because Kate, who now lives in Austin, is an independent, according to her, but as you said, seems to have voted for Velveeta Voldemort in the most recent presidential election. And this might be the breaking point between this trio. Maybe she is now going to be the odd woman out moving forward.
Maybe. I do want to call out that it was a little odd to me that they specifically peg her as living in Austin at this point and sort of describe Texans as being ultra conservative. I'm like, not in Austin. They're not.
Yeah, that was that maybe that was the wrong city in Texas to choose.
Yeah, they should have picked a different one because Austin is like the bluest of blue bubbles. So that doesn't quite fit.
But I do think Mike White is trying to make another point in this conversation, right? These are the conversations we talk about all the time. I'm sure you talk about on Millennial exhaustively, right? Around the dinner table where you know that somebody in your family or when you're getting together at Thanksgiving, right? These are the awkward conversations that happen, but I do think he was trying to say something through Kate when he said, look, like, yeah, I enjoy going to church and these are really nice people. And I think there's such a tendency to be like, either you're on this side or you're on this side, and there's no in between. There's no middle ground. These people are horrible individuals, and it's just not true. So, yeah. I think there was a little bit of that coming through in this conversation.
I think so too. Definitely with Jaclyn kind of having some really stereotypical takes on what living in a more conservative religious community looks like and making an assumption to say, well, how has that been for you to be around so many more conservative people? And it's like, well, you know, clearly you don't know your friend or your so-called friend as well as you say you do, because if you did, you would have a better sense of who she is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's this whole dynamic is strange. It's off.
I want to say that I'm interested to see where it goes, but I'm kind of all of the different guests and, you know, the families and the pairings and such, this is the one that I'm the least interested in right now.
I agree.
So hopefully that changes, but
yeah, I think the three of them are all really shitty. And you know, a couple of them may now want to think they're holier than thou and above it all because they're not Trump supporters. But I'm like, y'all have participated in some really shitty behavior, even if you're not a Trump supporter. So that doesn't just give you a pass to be an asshole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of assholes, let's talk a little bit about Greg and Chloe, and we can tie in Rick and Chelsea because their storylines have really merged at this point. We can throw in Belinda for good measure too. But with Greg and Chloe, Greg, aka Gary, let's call him by his season 3 name for right now, he's hanging out in Thailand. He has a new girlfriend, or a hooker if you ask Rick. And these two are definitely, to me, they're scheming. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were the ones behind the robbery in episode 2.
Totally. Especially with Chloe very conveniently being in a changing room when the robbery happened and really downplaying the importance of the robbery. Like, I don't know, if I were in Chelsea's shoes, I too would probably be feeling like I almost died today. But if you're the one who's orchestrating the robbery, like, I think we are suspecting that Chloe and Gary were, then it becomes a lot easier to say, you were fine. Like, you were never the target. Nobody was ever going to shoot you.
Of course, because you knew.
Yeah.
And Chloe's the one who suggests going shopping. She's like, oh, there's this cute little shop. So
yeah. Oh, that's a really good catch. You are right. Because, she got the credit card.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. And with Gary and Rick, there's been some kind of fun moments between these two thus far. I just think real recognizes real, and I think they can both smell con artist on each other a mile away.
Oh, yeah. The whole, like, what do you do? A bit of this, bit of that.
Yeah.
Bit of this, bit of that. Pays the bills, It's like, they are cut from the same cloth, for sure.
But it begs the question for me, though, with Rick and Chelsea, why are they together? How did they meet? She seems like she actually really cares about Rick. Rick seems like he's just completely in his own space right now. And I think that has a lot to do with his past, which we are given a little bit of a look into in his treatment sessions, right? He talks about having a mother who died from ODing, a father who was murdered before he was born. So he's definitely going through processing all of those things on this trip. And I think a large reason why, probably the reason why he decided to come to Thailand is because the owners of this hotel have some tie to his past.
Uh-huh. Yeah, some dark parts of his past, right? And where we leave him at the end of episode 3 is he's getting ready to go to Bangkok.
Exactly. And we know that is where Jim Hollinger is, who's one of the co-owners of the hotel. We haven't met him yet. We've met his wife, who Rick sweet talked a fair bit at the start of this episode in order to get her contact information. So is it fair to say, I mean, I've seen a lot of fan theories out there that Jim is probably in some way responsible for what happened to Rick's father. Maybe he wasn't the one who murdered him, but maybe he was involved in some way.
Yeah, or he knows something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out with the co-ownership of the White Lotus as well. Because, and I forgive me if I butcher the pronunciation.
Well, even the general manager can't pronounce her name.
I know.
That was awkward.
Yeah.
How long have you worked together?
Sritala, I think it was. Mm-hmm. That Fabian, who's that hotel manager, can't pronounce. There's definitely something under the surface with her too.
Yeah. Yeah, she talks about having an autoimmune disease at one point, but she's also clearly very much enamored with it's Jaclyn, right? Who's
Jaclyn,
TV star. So I'm not entirely. I know she had a past where she was an actress. I don't. Again, probably more to learn there.
Yeah, I think so too. We don't know a lot yet. It kind of feels like everything we've heard about her has been more like the stuff of legend. I feel like we're getting a lot of a lot of telling and not a lot of showing.
A book. I wouldn't be surprised if she had like a CD back in the day or something.
A podcast. I mean, everyone has one of those now.
That's true. Let's talk a little bit about Belinda. We mentioned her at the top of the episode. She is definitely now weaving her way into the Greg / Gary storyline. So everyone's favorite masseuse from season 1 is back to learn from some of the best the White Lotus Thailand has to offer, especially from Porn Chai, which, by the way, is one hell of a name for a character. And it seems to be like there might be some Porn Chai going on between Belinda and Porn Chai in the future.
Listen, I'm rooting for my girl because I was like, the first time she saw that man in his undies, I was like, I get it. I
and
totally.
He's like, do you want me on my back or my stomach? And she's like, what?
She's like, both.
Oh man.
But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens here with Belinda because, she's here, like you said, on a mission to learn from the best of the White Lotus, but she recognizes Greg, aka Gary. And it's pretty clear by the end of the episode, she has pegged him for who he is. And things are about to get really interesting because a few of these characters are getting ready to go out on Gary's boat, it sounds like.
Is this the same boat from season 2?
I think it must be. They said it was a yacht. So,
I mean, hopefully they cleaned that thing up.
Yeah, hopefully. A lot of blood spilled on there.
For sure.
Yeah.
What I love about it though is that she's totally blown up his spot. Mm-hmm. Like he was just out enjoying dinner, not expecting anything, and she basically laid it all out on the table. I mean, he did a good job. He wasn't convincing. I wouldn't have been convinced if I was anybody else sitting at that table. Mm-hmm. And now the question is, what kind of target does that put on her back?
I think it definitely puts one. I mean, where we leave her at the end of the episode, she's scared. Yeah, understandably
and
so.
It's probably nothing. It's probably just nature outside, but you never know. And, but in a fight, I would 100% take Belinda over Gary.
Yeah.
There's no question. But
for sure.
One thing I did want to bring up, because the actress who plays Belinda mentioned in an interview, Natasha Rothwell, that Belinda is going to begin investigating what happened to Tanya after recognizing Greg. And it's important, you mentioned this earlier, that Tanya was planning to invest in Belinda's startup until she met and ultimately married Greg. So I don't think that Belinda knows what happened to Tanya. Mm-mm. But I think she's going to find out. And the quote that she had is, she's looking up what happened and she's trying to piece it together, and the math ain't mathin'.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense at this stage because I'm sure Belinda, when she sees Gary, knows who he is putting 2 and 2 together to say, hey, this person who I thought was my friend kind of ghosted me when she ran off to marry you. And now here you are without her and with some new chick pretending like you don't know who I am.
Right.
So I think I think that at the end of this episode, we've unlocked what probably the biggest driving story arc is going to be for the rest of the season.
How is she going to keep herself safe? Is Porn Chai going to protect her? Maybe it's Porn Chai in the pond.
Maybe. Oh, no, I hope not.
I just want to keep saying Porn Chai. I'm just looking for opportunities. But
I just want them to have their sweet, sweet love, okay?
You might get it. I mean, this is the White Lotus. I would be actually disappointed if you don't. Now, I don't know if you've seen the preview for episode 4, but Belinda does come across the article of what happened on the yacht.
Oh,
so
okay.
She's starting to put things together. I won't jump ahead too much. Anything else we want to say on this group of guests, whether it's Rick, Chelsea, Greg, Chloe, Belinda?
Oh man, there is so much that we could say about all of these folks, and there's definitely a lot to pay attention to here. One call out that I had that I wanted to make sure to mention was when they're at the dinner table, Chloe is telling Chelsea about Gary's last wife and saying that she was completely psycho and she walked into the ocean to kill herself and they only recovered her leg. And I was just like, what the what? So like we're already hearing the kinds of stories that he'll make up about the collateral damage that he leaves behind when he ruins people's lives. So it'll be very interesting to see how that all comes together too. When all these people end up on the same boat too, because we know that Chloe is definitely flirting with Saxon. He's going to be on the boat. It seemed like Gary was noticing that and kind of bothered by it.
I don't think he cares. Do you think he cares?
He definitely noticed. He definitely noticed it. I don't know if he cares or not.
I'm just trying to also figure out what's his angle too with Chloe knowing his track record. Like, does she have money?
Yeah. I mean, it would seem to suggest.
Is she just a cover for right now?
Maybe. Yeah. It'll be interesting to pay attention to her because it also seems like he doesn't know anything about her, which is why Rick
calls her French when she's Canadian.
And she's like, I'm from Quebec.
It also seemed like they didn't have their stories straight too. He jumped in to say that they met on a dating service in Dubai, but she looked like she was going to say something completely different.
Yeah, they did not get their story straight beforehand.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll have to see how the rest of this unfolds. How many episodes are left, Micah?
So this is episode 3 of 8 episodes. So normally there've been 6 episodes. So we're getting 8 this year. And yeah, the boat is going to be interesting next episode. There was a preview, as I mentioned. There's a lot of stuff going on, including Tim talking with Gary. So maybe Gary's going to bail him out of his money laundering issues. But what is Gary going to want in return?
Yeah, nothing good.
All right. Well, we covered a lot. There's a lot more to talk about. And it is worth mentioning, we will do another episode following the finale of this season of The White Lotus. But before we wrap up, anything on the other staff members, Laura, that you wanted to talk about? We talked about the Hollingers who own the hotel, briefly mentioned Fabian, or Fabian, I think he's called by one of the guards in this episode. There's like a slightly budding romance between Mook and Gaitak.
Yeah.
I don't like Mook. Something's up with Mook.
Yeah, she's sketch.
Right? She's
sketch as hell. There's no getting around that.
I don't know what it is yet. I don't know. Maybe she was involved in the robbery in some way, but something about her doesn't sit right with me. I'm worried for my guy, Gaitak.
Yeah, I know. He's so nice too. And shout out, by the way, because Mook is played by Lisa from Blackpink, which is a K-pop band. So, and this was her acting debut this season of White Lotus.
Very cool.
Yeah, they get a lot of really interesting cast in these shows, like an interesting mixture of established actors and new talent.
Yeah, and Mike White, who was on Survivor and is a big Survivor fan, always casts members of his season of Survivor in each of the 3 White Lotus seasons so far. So there was a pair of survivors who were actually eating dinner in the first episode at the hotel. So I thought that was kind of cool.
That's really cool. I didn't realize he did that.
The only one we haven't mentioned is Valentin. And they make a point of telling us that he is a Russian wellness counselor, and he's caught the eye of pretty much everybody at the resort, but specifically the 3 women who are traveling together. What do we think of him? Like, and he actually gave a little bit of his backstory, right? He's from Vladivostok.
Yeah.
And they said like, oh, I'm so glad you were able to get here before escaping the war. I didn't know if that was a commentary on what's going on in the Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, I assume it was because they're talking about everything else sort of like present tense in terms of what's going on in our world. So my assumption is that this story is taking place presently, you know?
Yeah. And he's a likely co-conspirator in my mind in the robbery, because he is the one who distracts Gaitak in the last episode while the car is entering the hotel grounds that has the robbers in it. He's trying to like offer him tickets to a fight that's coming up later that week, and it's all too convenient. So he may not be one of the robbers, but he's definitely involved in whatever's going on.
Yeah, he's for sure a co-conspirator in that. And he's also, it's very clear that a lot of the wellness assessments that they're selling people on here are total BS, because he's over here telling like 2 of the 3 women in the friend group that they have better numbers than women half their age, and just like a whole bunch of bullshit to try and basically, you know, pump people up, make people feel really positive and like they're getting this healthy experience out of being at this resort, when it's really like, you went to some yoga, you drank some cucumber water, and that was all very good and well for you, but like it didn't all of a sudden change your cholesterol or anything like that, you know?
Right. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, I think that does it for this episode. Just a few quick things before we officially wrap it up. We always like to ask, is it worth the hype? Laura, is White Lotus worth the hype? I don't think we've been talking for this long if it wasn't.
No, not at all. And honestly, I just picked up this show kind of just on a lark after the first season came out, because I was interested in the cast. And it's just a really easy show to get sucked into because there's a lot of intrigue. And I'm always a sucker for a good mystery. So if you are too, then I think this show's for you.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, who is this show for? What other shows would you say, if you're interested in, White Lotus might be for you?
Yeah, I think if you like Only Murders in the Building, if you liked Big Little Lies, if you are currently watching Severance, which holy shit, there's another show you got to be on top of. And Succession is another one. I think all of these shows really kind of hold up a mirror to kind of reflect the uncanny and the ugliness of humanity. You know, both in and outside of our own spaces.
And I think one of the things that I think surprised people, particularly in the first season, maybe not as much in the second, although there were moments, was just the shock value moments, particularly from, you know, a sex standpoint. That hasn't been as prevalent in season 3 thus far, but again, it's the White Lotus, so I'm sure it's coming at some point.
I mean, we still got 5 episodes left, so the series is young.
All right, well, Laura, thanks so much for joining me literally right after season 3 aired. I know the Oscars are also going on, so hopefully I'm not taking you away from that.
Not at all. The good news is I think Pam and Andrew are both keeping an eye on the Oscars right now, so we've got good coverage.
All right. Well, and thanks to our listeners for joining us as well. Don't forget, be sure to follow us in your favorite podcast app and leave us a review. We want to know what you think about the show, and follow us on social media too. We're at What the Hype Podcast on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitch, and at What the Hype Show on X. Our website is whatthehypepodcast.com. And if you want to email us about anything, you can do that at whatthehypepodcast@gmail.com. And finally, does a friend or family member, I wouldn't necessarily recommend watching this with your family, but depends. If you're as close as the Ratliffs are, maybe you want to watch it together.
Oh, God.
But if they need convincing about why the White Lotus is worth the watch, please share this episode with a friend and tell them that we're walking through every aspect of pop culture each and every week. And as mentioned, we'll be back with a follow-up episode in just a few weeks following the finale of season 3. So for now, that is the hype on the White Lotus. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, y'all. We'll see you next
Bye.
time. Bye.